This is Nicole's version of the hook. Okay, it's time to go, guys.
Definitely is. You guys can get started whenever.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ATAR Cloud and Coffee discussion on all things modernization and transformation. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks, and here with my co-host.
And I'm Bill Hunt from the U.S. Small Business Administration.
Before the introductions, this platform is hosted under the ATAR Cloud and Infrastructure Working Group with the goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATAR community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experiences, past and present, executing modernization and transformation efforts. There's a Q&A feature. It's the button down at the bottom for questions. So feel free to enter questions in the chat, and we will get to those as we can through the conversation. So now let's move on to introductions. Today we actually have two guests from DOJ, Justice Management Division, Monique Bourque and Peter Lee. Monique and Peter, would you mind giving a little of your title and what you guys do at DOJ?
Oh, sure. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for having us, Chris and Bill. We're excited to be here. So I'm Monique Bourque. I work for our Chief Technology Officer, Ron Butra. So I work in his office. And a few years ago, we expanded that office to include a new branch, Innovation Engineering. So I head up that team. I'm the assistant director there. So that's been a fun and exciting group. And so we get involved in a lot of different strategy development, a lot of ideation, innovation, micro innovations, how to spur that sort of dialogue and engineer sort of gap solutions to already existing solutions across the department. So we work with our colleagues like Peter across the department and other areas. So, but then I've also been, as we all have been so busy this past year with the pandemic, helping to cover for hiring gaps. And so I've been back helping out with the data center transformation initiative team this past year as well. So
awesome. Thank you. And Peter?
Good morning. My name is Peter Lee. I run the cloud management team at the Department of Justice. We help components migrate to cloud. We help components develop their acquisitions to cloud. We also provide seed funding for components to migrate to cloud, in addition to performing cloud readiness assessment for their application to the cloud. We also run a cloud sandbox, and we do a lot of engagement for components, hosting weekly workshops and office hours so that we can bring in vendors and experts and subject matter experts to bring the latest offering from the cloud vendors, technology on security and network, and any procurement changes that they may help them to migrate their workload to the cloud.
Great. And I've had the pleasure of chatting and talking to Peter and Monique over the past couple of years on a lot of things, modernization efforts in the government. And obviously DOJ, as we've talked about on previous shows, is a leader in this area. And so I'm going to kind of go into the first question around, you guys, again, being the leader, and data center consolidation has been something that, over the course of 10 years. And when we had Tom Santucci on, who we were just chatting about, he talked about, that effort. I'm kind of curious, as and Monique, you've had both, kind of roles in and out, but with your new role in kind of innovation and the kind of the tie to cloud and the cloud management team, how are you guys seeing kind of where the future is going with what's going on in the technology world and the ability to kind of capitalize on that?
yeah, so there's always more than enough information to digest and think about where to go. But we definitely been seeing a lot of the fruits of a lot of long-term initiatives coming to bear these last few years. The investment the department has made in data center consolidation, optimization, we're maturing that. So that's fun. The investment in our cloud management team, and really starting to see momentum there and the movement of the components to the cloud. So at the department, we've really taken the approach to best practices, what makes sense from a mission perspective. So marrying the requirements of federal policy and requirements with a few choice key department goals and policy, and then doing a lot of these department-specific community practices. So sort of, the trickle down from what you're seeing at the federal level, bringing it into the department space. What does it mean to us? What have we already invested in? How do we maximize those current investments? And how do we focus on our mission requirements and fill those key gap areas and mature while we're adding in geospatial strategy, data strategy, AI strategy. So, and then, as a result, we have a new data governance board this past year that pulls a lot of those tenets together. And then as we look forward, we're asking ourselves, what does the next, what does it look like? So as far as we mature our data management and we want to truly be in this shareable position with data, what does that look like? And what does hybrid cloud mean to us? What does that look like in the department? There's probably a lot of different definitions of hybrid cloud. And so what does that really mean to DOJ? So we launched an innovation community of interest this past year, and we're really keeping it focused to DOJ because you can get inundated with what others are doing. And we've released our AI strategy recently and launched that community of practice as well, and really trying to figure out how these all sort of work together. And then our data architecture working group is maturing, and then working closely with Peter and his community in the cloud community on, okay, now we have a footprint in the cloud, we have a footprint in our CEFs, we're moving towards our CEF goals. We're waiting for that 100th data center close. We're close. Maybe in the next month or two, we'll have a big fanfare. But we're achieving those data center closure goals. And what do we want from a cloud perspective? What are we seeing the future, with data centers? Making sure we're continuing to mature that service, operationalize, and then from a cloud footprint, how do we make sure we're moving data around easily there? So containerization, Kubernetes, cloud agnostic. What does that look like? What are options? Recognizing, we've still got folks moving to the cloud, right? And then you layer in application rationalization. Where does that fit in, right? As well to that. So there's at the end of the day, how do our CIOs in the department see where we're trying to align and go, right? And then as they are meeting their mission needs, running their investigations, pulling in large data of, video surveillance footage, whatever it is, wiretap data, working to digest that data, and then work with key, investigators across the department, law enforcement, federal, state, local, and then litigation. How do we move that data around? So as we look to build out our cloud footprint and hybrid cloud and our network, are we optimizing how we're able to move data around securely, right? So there's just that, so I think right there, being able to truly digest the large data sets, move them around, video and translation, I think are two key big data areas. And then being in a position to maximize our AI tools collectively across the department too, as well. So things are just moving. Everything's always, that's the challenge in IT, right? Everything's always moving at such a fast pace that it's so hard to know what the person next door is doing, right? So these communities of practice within the department has helped us there. But I think I know Peter and I are focused on that sort of cloud agnostic footprint. What does that look like? And how does that layer in with these other projects? And is it aligning with networks at the end of the day, which is always one of our pain points? Like, are we going to have the speed we want and the secure access across the department, out to FedRAMP and back? Is it the right partners we've made? So it's all those pieces and a lot of moving parts. But I think we're definitely starting to mature in a number of areas, which is fun.
That's awesome.
That might have been more than you asked for, Chris. Sorry.
Just the
No, I
lead
don't
into the
think
rest of the show. This is great. I mean, we got a lot of things to talk about now. Peter, I do want to give you a chance to jump in here too. I mean, obviously, DOJ has gone through an incredible transformation. You know, myself as a spectator from the outside in my previous role sitting at OMB, watching you all basically leading the government and, you know, how this transition has gone on. What have you seen from your perspective, and how have you changed how you do business as an organization?
Yeah, I think we're improving our acquisition. We're improving our migrations. In the beginning, there was a much more difficult journey to migrate to cloud. The first data center that was closing, rationalizing those servers and application, moving to the cloud, and collecting those lessons learned. But those pain, those tasks of collecting lessons learned and collecting pitfalls and working into the contract and working into our cloud community and sharing those lessons learned has been valuable, because the subsequent components that have been migrated have absorbed all those lessons learned. And we realized, you can't just lift and shift right into the cloud, because you basically you set up your exact same infrastructure in the cloud, and that would give you you'll lead to the exact same bottlenecks and issues that you had in infrastructure. So the subsequent community that we moved up, different components moved up, we implement those lessons learned. We slow down our cloud readiness assessment to really look at the application, look at the usage, talk to the application owner, the business owner, and see how the application profile is being utilized, and what access they need, what data they need, what type of sharing they may need, and also what type of exit strategy they may need to get out of that vendor if they need to. And so that has been very helpful. And so unfortunately, the first few that went up suffered all the painful lessons learned, but then the subsequent one has been faster and faster. Now, as Monique mentioned, we're getting down to just a handful of data center, single digit data center, and those are the tougher ones. Those are the one that has the most technical depth. So they have to go through and perform a series of technical upgrade before they can get to cloud. Solidify the applications, their network, their infrastructure before they get to cloud. Because if they were to migrate as is, they would just run into the same issue with performance, with cost, with storage, with utilization running out of control. So definitely, all the lessons learned that we have been gathering has been reused, and we share that every week, in these office hours. And there is similar to this, where it's some of it's presentation, some of it is very informal, questions and answer. And then from those, we elicit detailed challenges, and then we have breakout. And then those breakout sessions is where we bring in the expert in architecture and security on application, and then help whiteboard or develop solutions out of that. And then I think another thing that's been very helpful is our cloud sandbox has been very helpful. And the big success from the cloud sandbox has been some of the failures. And you wouldn't think that would be a success, but the failure really helps us to eliminate certain solutions that wouldn't work. And so, in theory, certain vendors come in and they say, okay, I have the exact solution for you. And this is, we'll implement this solution because they work from us, from the agency. So as they implement in this cloud sandbox, we realize that, our networking or our rules or our restriction or requirement is not compatible with that solution. And so we fail. And then, of course, the engineering team are very disappointed that we failed. But I see it as a great success, because you prove that it won't work. Because had we invested this in the solution going all the way to production, we would have had a bigger failure. We wanted to fail in the sandbox test environment, and before we get to the next solution. So a number of failure in that environment is, from my perspective, it's a major success, because we proved out quickly that it won't work in our environment. And solution that may work very well in GSA or other organizations will not work in our organization because of the unique structure of our network, the unique structure of our requirement, the security requirements, and sometimes just the unique structure of the way that we have set up our communication channels. As Monique has mentioned, it's been a struggle moving data back and forth. And you would think, having been in this space for 10 years or so, that would be solved. It's not solved. It's just an ongoing struggle to move data and share data and reuse the data that we have. And even as recently, it's not just trying to get data up into our cloud vendor has been a challenge. Spooling connections and multi-threading is still a challenge. There's just so many nuances in the network that you have to configure to get that to work. So a lot of my work is really going in and troubleshooting a lot of this, and then from those develop solution or SOPs, and then using that again for the next folks that are migrating out.
So the one thing that I have always been impressed with DOJ from the standpoint, and you both actually touched on it, was and I believe it is a uniqueness because of the varying uniquenesses within the components, right? Their missions, while there are synergies, right? The litigating components, the enforcement components, et cetera. It is interesting that both of you are involved in what I would say best of breed, right? The sandbox is a good place to play for a litigating component. Monique, you have a team that is looking at technologies that could be used and capitalized for all litigating components versus one going off and doing one thing and one doing another. Is that I guess a benefit that you guys have seen to making some of these innovation decisions and kind of that that aspect of it?
Oh yeah, definitely, Chris. It's kind of funny. It's a little bit of a homecoming doing DCTI again this past year, but it and Peter and I are working side by side with the team, so we share resources for application rationalization. His team supports our litigation community and that team program. When we're trying to put together a diagram for enterprise ATO for connecting an ATO system boundary to a FedRAMP authorization for certain litigation tools, right? So, that last mile connection is what often takes, long or may never happen for a smaller component or components not quite, understanding all the nuances. The expertise in cybersecurity with FedRAMP and ATOs and system boundary is such this hyper-focused skill set. So we really try to cross pool and know who's the subject matter expert across OCIO and pull them into those discussions. So Peter and I work constantly on that. And one example that we with our last mile components, we've got is the network getting the backbone, getting upgraded to the 100 gig backbone they need to move the data out to the CEFs if they're going hybrid, right? And so even though Peter's cloud, he's involved in that design. If it's a litigating component, I pull in my team because they know all the tools, right, and what's working. We pull in our network team. We've got you want to know what applications? We got our application rationalization inventory, right? That team, we pull that data in. I've got we've got our ISO supporting us. So I don't have to lean on someone else, particularly in all these working capital fund models, right? We kind of need our own resources that are lean and experts and can come in quickly. So we have one full-time cybersecurity ISO on our team that's supporting all these different efforts. We have, Peter's got a cloud architect, a couple of people in rationalization, application rationalization. We have a Power BI SME to help with dashboarding, visualization. We got all this great data. Are we doing enough with it? We're farming them out to work on HR executive resourcing, with criminal data, with any of our litigating components that need help, a billing model for our services, right? So they, with that kind of expertise, after working a couple of weeks, they've got a dashboard up. You can't get that launched, and so it helps really launch all that. But I really, and then our data management teams under us and our AI, and then we can cross over and work with our portfolio investment management team and enterprise architecture. So you start to see a lot of fun synergies that we didn't have before, I think. And so it's been fun for me a little bit, although it's been extra work to say, hey, wait a minute. This is all we can just tap these folks, pull them into a meeting, and really help get some immediate insights into what do we know to help this component solve for their problem. And one of the things we matured this past year also is sort of our technology resource guide, we refer to it. So it's kind of, think of it like a supplement to our technology reference standards. So we're always, our architecture, but our guide will say, hey, these are the tools this is their current status. Are they in the cloud? Are they on-prem? Here's some links to them. Here's the enterprise agreement if you want to purchase from, and then here's who's using them right in the department. And this is how they're using them. And then we also provide a bit of a matrix that says, here are all the tools in use in the department in this space, right? So it's, and then we'll constantly update that as we bring in new tools and folks are using them. So from a market research perspective, we're maximizing what we're using in the department and giving that information back to our customers, which are the department, employees that we're trying to advocate for, and just say, hey, look, if it's always better to adopt and advance with what you have if you can, if that fits your need, or at least if you're doing your market research, consider these product tools as well as something else. So we never say you can't use anything else, right? And then some new entries will come into the fold. But it's always mission-driven, requirements-driven need, and then we just help them reduce their time. Reduce their time to insight, their ability to acquire and understand what's going on, and so we become that information hub of knowledge. And so we're doing that through our SharePoint, our intranet site, through the community practice, and then we also do these quarterly tech updates, so they can also see some. That's where we would introduce other vendor meets and things we're doing. It's a little less of that this past year. Ron used to travel a lot more, and Joe before he left, and that changeover with Joe and Melinda happened. Joe left right before the pandemic, and so we haven't had all those kind of road shows where we're working with vendors. But that's all the information that can trickle down, and then we can help them engineer. If they're coming in for a department investment review and they need some help architecting or engineering a diagram, those visuals I always feel are key. Like if you can do a 1 or 2 page diagram visual that explains to leadership, this is my footprint and this is what I'm trying to do, it beats a 10-page document every day, right? And so, or it supplements it. So we try to put that visual piece, so that people can have that quick elevator understanding of what we're trying to do. And it helps simplify and keep the alignment. And it's hard to get to that because, you're giving up a lot of technical pieces along the way in deciding what conceptually is what you want to convey at that level. But then Peter's team has he actually, will have the resources to, they provide a lot of hands-on technical source. And then some folks from our team will go out as well if we need to, or we try to connect them. So it's not a lot that we're helping with, but I think sometimes it helps keep the idea and the hope going and helps folks connect a few more dots to get to where they need to be, whereas maybe they would have been stuck in a dead end or a cul-de-sac and it never gets launched. So, and Peter's point about failure, I think, is key. I mean, we give that safe place to fail. So as we try to transition to agile approach, right, and agile development, we really do try to give that safe place to fail. It's our money, it's not their money. We can, so I think it really helps give that safe place to fail. And and we do all this with not a lot of money, but it's enough to flex and make things happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the CTO Monique Bourque has been really been our advocate and our sponsor in a lot of these projects, and also helping us to identify resources that we could reuse or is underutilized in licensing hardware or in the network area that we can reutilize, because a lot of companies comes to the table with resource and they may have excess in one area if they're migrating to the cloud. The resources may be excess, and that could be reused for another component. Sometimes storage is reused before the license or the warranty is out. So the CTO team has been really good at helping us point out to different components that we can look at that may be outside of our silo. And then a lot of times just trying to break out of the silo to help components has been a challenge. But I think the CTO office and the procurement office has really helped us to identify license that may be underutilized or hardware that are underutilized. And those have been very helpful to either do prototyping or just to integrate those into the environment. I know several components has come to us to look for license for NetApp, for example, and look for license and hardware for their storage so that they can supplement their migration to the cloud. That's been really helpful to get the CTO level of view advantage, and then they can look across the department to identify those resources. So it's been very great collaborating with Monique and the CTO office.
Yeah. Yeah. So a success to us is something sustainable that a component can run, right?
Right.
We don't want them to keep knocking on our door when they get to the next step, right?
Right.
You know, so we want them to have options, have sustainable, secure options. So our cybersecurity team's happy, right? But we, you know, align them with an enterprise procurement model. So that makes us happy, right? It's a technically forward-thinking architecture approach. Doesn't have to be too forward, but we definitely have components. You know, this is where the application rationalization is useful. Is, you know, say, hey, you know, if you're not looking at cloud, you ought to be looking at cloud. I mean, we're past that point, and it's short-sighted not to have a hybrid cloud model, at least in a path to the cloud in your roadmap. At some point, you're going to be caught up short at some point, even if leadership's not ready for it or concerned about security, you have a real business need not to be in the cloud. That's fine, but at least know, you know, like do a backup test there, make sure you can run there if you need to. But yeah, we really try hard to not push them. You know, we want to push them a little bit out of their comfort zone, help support them, but at the same time, they have to be able to own and run it with the skills they have resourced. And if they don't quite have those skills yet, then, you know, what's a way to, you know, get to the same place. So that's where our philosophy around these enterprise ATOs we're doing. So with either if it's a FedRAMP tool, so DOJ sponsored the FedRAMP for a few tools. So like Veritone's a new trending tool. That's a SaaS solution. Everlaw is another SaaS solution. These are in the electronic litigation space. And then Relativity was sponsored by EPA. But so those are ones that are used by a lot of our litigating components. And a lot of them have on-prem version solutions of that. And some of them are running the on-prem version of them in a cloud environment boundary. So, that's where we, with an enterprise ATO model, kind of like what we've done with our Office 365, right? So we create the umbrella ATO, we can manage it at the department level, the inheriting the controls in from FedRAMP, create the ATO boundary, and then the components come in with their smaller number of controls to connect in that they have to be responsible for, depending upon how they're doing that last mile connection and authentication at the end of the day. And if they want to have, you know, another agency come in and so forth. But it opens up a lot of options and opportunities. And so we're in the middle of a few pilots with that. That's where our one ISO, you know, our information security officer can manage multiple of these projects. And so it saves money. And then we're in some pilots. So we work closely with Peter's team on that. And then aligning that into an operational model so it's sustainable in our operations going after. We usually see it takes us 2 to 3 years to launch kind of one of these little micro innovation projects out of us and into operations. So then it's part of the regular work stream and funding stream that everyone pays a little piece of the pie for.
So there's so many little things there. Oh, I'm getting really bad feedback all of a sudden, sorry. So lots of little things in there that I would love to start like picking apart. Could at least do like 10 more hours on all of the things you have listed there, but unfortunately it's a short show. So I do want to get to some of the questions that the audience is asking. I'm gonna start with Bob's question here, and I'm gonna editorialize a little bit on this one here. Bob is asking about how much savings you actually have realized by moving to the cloud, you know, versus being in the data center. And anybody who's ever listened to the show before has heard me on my soapbox on this topic, or if you ever heard me speak when I was in my OMB job, and that is that generally speaking, agencies at this point, after 10 years of FDCCI, aren't really seeing massive cloud conversion savings moving away from data centers. It's expensive to close data centers. If my memory serves me correctly, and if my numbers are correct me if I'm wrong, Justice, I believe, had recorded that you saved over the last 4 years of DCOI around $200 million, I think is correct. But as we all know, that's cost savings and avoidance, not just cost savings, right? So for instance, if you decide to not open a data center, that could be cost avoidance. So what I'm getting at here is this. The reason why one would move to the cloud these days isn't necessarily just because of the cost savings. Maybe you all can talk about some of the other conversations you have when you're going through this like application rationalization process, thinking about the capabilities that the cloud unlocks, and talk about how you do that sort of adjudication around like the value stream to say that this is a good decision for the agency. You know, when I talked to Joe Klimovich about this like 4 years ago, you know, I was like, you all are doing great at closing data centers. How are you doing so great? Is it for the cost savings? He said, no, it's because my security footprint is smaller. That's all I care about. You know, and that was a great conversation for me as a young policy analyst trying to figure this stuff out. So maybe you all, instead of me filibustering on this topic, could talk a little bit about how you actually do that rationalization around the value stream, how you make the adjudication of moving things to a particular cloud instance. Peter, maybe you can start from your side, thinking about the acquisition piece and how you work through, and then Monique, you can chime in.
Sure. So part of our cloud readiness assessment, we fill out a total cost of ownership. And then in the total cost of ownership, we have categories in there that the component might not have thought of. And some of the categories like, what is the cost of the labor for your engineer to check, you know, for system being up and down monitoring? What is the cost of a system outage? What is the cost of training and things like that? So some of the cost is not tangible as far as savings, but for some of the components that we have moved, and it's been dramatic in their operations. For example, one of the components we helped move a couple of years ago, they had a tape backup, but it was never reliable. And the tape machine they were using was on its last leg, and they were, you know, debating either to refresh it or wait into the migration and then maybe invest in network to get the system out into the cloud. So they were, you know, they were really playing Russian roulette with their backups. And, you know, God forbid they had any kind of cyber incident, they were in big trouble. But anyway, after they moved to the Azure, now they have a reliable backup mechanism inside Azure. This is not tape related. It's this, and then they would move the image from one availability zone to another availability zone, and they really have reliability in that disk backup now, so they can just restore if they had an outage, and they can have multiple copies, multiple versions, and go back much longer than they could have with tape. And the cost was, you know, almost the same. You know, it's not the cheaper, or it's almost the same as the tape backup they were using on-prem. So the operation team has, you know, been freed up from having this 20-minute, 30-minute checks every day to make sure the tape backed up overnight, or the tape did not run into the daytime, and have the tape, you know, back and stop the tape. So the operation team now can focus on you know, more operation maintenance, the server maintenance, patches and so forth. So they were, you know, they were catching up faster in their patch up. So how much is that worth? How do you quantify that cost? Like, hey, you know, we were running, you know, 1 or 2 months behind on patches, but now we're up to date. As soon as patches come out, we apply them into the test version and then get them into production. So it's hard to quantify that. So I asked the CIO, is like, put a value on that, and then put that as part of your, add that as part of your total cost of ownership. And that's really what you're saving from moving out of the data center. Yes, you close the data center, and you might have saved, you know, 200,000 or so from the rent or the power and then you save some X amount for the hardware that you didn't have to refresh every 4 years. But then what about the operation team? You used to have, you know, 5 operation staff running around, managing the servers, managing the backup, managing the network, managing, you know, trouble tickets and so forth. And now you're working with 4. So how much is that extra person that you have to hire before that you didn't have to backfill? So, you know, personnel that you can reutilize for something, you know, for another purpose, like you know, business requirement gathering, or project management, you know, of other programs, or engaging on new project. That's a saving that is hard to quantify, and it's not always transparent, you know, in operation. So some of that cost, you know, we put together in the total cost of ownership, and then then it really highlighted or showed this the CIO that it is a tangible saving, although it's not the same metric that OMB normally asks us to collect, but it is a saving for the operation. It is a saving and improvement in your operation. And the end result is the end user, do they experience any difference between the application being in the data center versus the cloud? Do they have any improvement in the performance of the application? Is the normal maintenance, care and feeding of the application, is that improved? Are you, patching and having to install software late at night, or can you do that in the daytime and then flip over images and so forth in the daytime, so that your operations staff are less stressed and maybe bright, are more alert during the day because they didn't have to spend all night patching servers and so forth. So some of those are the saving that intangible, and I've been kind of evangelizing this through our cloud communities. Like those are the true costs of cloud. It's not just the physical hardware that you're saving or the license that you may be saving, but it's also all the intangible, the improvement in operation that you will achieve when you move to the cloud. And I'm not saying cloud is for every application. For a certain application, it has to remain on-prem because of the nature of the application or the networking or the other requirements of the application. But at least for the one that moved, we want to make sure we have the data that's necessary for the leadership to consider all of the costs, the total cost, not just the hardware cost, but application costs for the move to the cloud.
And I do want to give credit where credit is due. I mean, anybody who's listening into this should be aware that Department of Justice has been leagues ahead of most other federal agencies on this particular topic of going through the AppWrap process of looking at total cost of ownership. And just being frank here, if anybody listened to the episode with Tom a couple of weeks back, a lot of the work that you all did was the pattern for the guide that we put out, the application rationalization playbook, through the Federal CIO Council, through long interviews with you all, picking your brains about how is it that you all are so great at this, and how can we make everybody else be equally great at it? So just a plug here that if you haven't checked that out for our listeners, please go check out the application rationalization playbook through the CIO Council, because all the great stuff that Peter is talking about, some of it is captured in there. Not all of it, they have their secret sauce, but a lot of it is in there. Sorry, Monique, please, if you could give your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think it is an individual basis. I think I think our number maybe is 160 million to date. We probably modified it down, but yeah, it's less about the savings. Obviously, you don't want to increase; you want to have some savings. So at the end of the day, but I think it's more about doing more with the same, right? So and to Joe's point, that is added security in was added security in his view. I feel it brings to Peter's point, it simplifies your business process and work stream. It does change the skill set to some degree. You do need, so sort of part and parcel with application rationalization, you should be looking at business processing, air engineering, and there's a lot of things that streamline or just different there, but ultimately streamline. I think it gives you more information at your fingertips versus being physically on site. And we've seen the benefit of that this past year. So that's been a big, I think, mindset game changer. There are small pockets of success stories where they've really realized a lot of savings. So Mike Cassidy being one of those at U.S. Trustees. But they also were already a fairly streamlined footprint, did a lot of virtualization before all of this effort. They also have more of a probably steady data flow, work stream, so it's not as volatile as others with, but a very distributed network environment. So they were able to save a lot on physical hardware, which really helped their make cloud attractive. So it's very dependent upon those situations. But then on the flip side, they do have to stay very current with what's trending and where they're going so that they're not caught off guard with any changes in the technology and so forth. So you have to weigh sort of your comfort level with that. But there is, as we go through these pilots with the components, on trying out a cloud tool, there's an immense amount of business processing they're looking at. The way they've prepped documents for loading into an on-prem solution is really different than maybe what you need to do for moving documents into a SaaS environment. And then understanding when those, when the charges start. So something to think about when you're negotiating with these key partners I think in the SaaS space and on your enterprise costs and licensing costs is, we're seeing a little bit of a trend where some vendors will allow you sort of this free space to get your data in, play with it while it's dirty, and then get it to where it needs to be. You can't park it, but it's sort of in limbo, and you're not charged for that activity until it's actually in one of your categories, active or archive or cold or whatever, So that is a way to also help with sort of this transition time. So you're less worried about like that clock is ticking, I'm burning up the bank account because I just dumped a bunch of data there. So thinking through that, having those conversations, these pilots and test, work streams are sort of key to really getting understanding the nuances. And every SaaS solution is different, and it's not pretty. We've had one pilot. It probably took us an extra month just to get the firewall settings and connections together because every component's a little different. But as folks, I think to some extent you don't have a choice right now. Like you ought to be looking at cloud in some capacity and getting comfortable with it and playing with it. Pick a safe area that's maybe less volatile that you can map out that you think is a good alignment, doing the assessment that Peter talked about. Most of the, AWS, Azure, Google will all offer these kind of assessments for free now. You should be able to get it out of them. If you don't have a team like Peter, we saw one after Peter's team started offering that, we saw at Microsoft and Amazon coming in and offering that, and Google now, if they're hungry enough and want your business, they'll offer some free analysis to, it doesn't take long for them to do a review and let you know what's immediately ready, what's not, what's some basic cost estimates. We really push back on the vendors also to give us a comparison. Hey, we're currently utilizing your resources on-prem now. How does that cost compare? And that's a challenge for some vendors to walk you through how is it going to change. And I always think that's an interesting exercise to do with them. And then it is hard to track the cost avoidance because oftentimes you're doing more. Once you decide to go to the cloud route, you end up doing so much more. But you do change your business process model, and if you plan it correctly and think of it less of lift and shift and think of it your 5-year plan or even 10-year plan, to be in a position where now your organization data is all accessible and, and you can slice and dice it and analyze it and use it. It's very portable. And then when you think about containerization, I think the containerization piece, as we move into that, will start yielding even more reduced total cost of ownership and improve your security front. That's going to start really saving times for your GOTS, your custom apps. That's going to save a lot.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm the one with the feedback. Are we good? Can you guys hear me? That actually brings a good kind of wrapper to the next question that we have from Aaron. We as a company always talk to that advocacy and that enterprise view, right? You need to know what you have before you start heading down the path, right? Don't just head down the path and figure it out. And we talk a lot about that on the show. Aaron, and I'll actually throw this out to all three of you a little bit, but Monique and Peter first, because it's just ties right to Bill's role. But how do you see the role of enterprise architecture in your strategic planning and road mapping to maximize the IT investments? And I think we touched a little bit on it in the way that you guys have kind of grouped components and looking at things. I don't know that we've gotten into the architecture, the enterprise architect role and discussion, but I think it definitely dovetail into what you both were just saying. So I'll throw that back out there.
And I think Monique is leading an effort to unify some of our strategy, our networking strategy, our cloud strategy, our data center strategy, our strategy into what's the next phase? What does that new architecture look like now that we're in the cloud, and we haven't have a label for it, but so far we're calling it hybrid cloud. But it also encompasses the next phase of evolution of the technology that we'll have from an enterprise perspective, and giving the insight into the CIO and CTO into seeing the applications downstream, an application that's being utilized, the footprint of the application, where resource and investment should be focused. So I think the enterprise architecture group is going to have a more prominent role in this area, as now that we're having more insight into the different applications. Before it was more silos of components and application and business unit, but having an enterprise view of all these different diverse applications, and then reviewing those investments so that they can be aligned, or they can be utilized, or they can be combined into certain contract or acquisition vehicle. Would be very helpful to help us increase savings, or just utilizing those applications more efficiently, so that we can realize savings, so that we can do more with the investment we have. And so it's just very similar to a house budget, or a house strategy is like, if we move to a certain district, what would that school look like? What is the advantage of that school district? What other advantage, as far as commuting and roads and so forth. So we're doing the same thing, as you would manage a house. We're moving from an entire department. If we were to move to this new architecture, reviewing what's all the advantages of that area, what that move would look like, and then slowly changing the department to realize that new vision. So I think when Monique and the CIO is putting together this new pathway, and I think it's very good. So as the rest of us are focused on operation and making sure the lights are on, and application are getting modernized, and application are getting cared for, the leadership is looking downroad, looking downstream to see where that new landing spot is, that new further ground is, and we'll move us slowly to that area.
So I want to get to some of these other questions in here, get all the audience participation here. We're getting so many great questions. There's one here that comes up a lot on this show, and I really want to ask you all it while we have the opportunity here. We talk a lot about like workforce reskilling, right? Workforce is one of the biggest barriers to cloud that we have identified at agencies historically. It's such a major issue that we even included as an entire section of the Cloud Smart strategy just to address it, because so many agencies struggle with this. But again, from my previous life, I have to say that the unbridled enthusiasm for cloud that Department of Justice presents is mind-boggling. Every time I've chatted with anyone over there, I don't know if it's by hook or by crook, but they've been so enthusiastic about it. One of my first introductions was like Sean Ruff, when we started talking about cloud email. He was just gung-ho and going for it, and ended up coming to OMB because he was so enthusiastic about it. And how is it that you all have done the job of bringing your staff along? And maybe you can tie it into the thing that Peter was talking about earlier about, using sandboxes and whatnot. You have a certain level of permission to fail that you're building into your organization, which I think takes some of the pressure off, starts to eliminate some of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Can you talk a little bit more about how you've built the culture that has brought your staff along on this cloud journey?
Yeah, so I think, one of the best thing we did was create this cloud management team that Peter's been leading now for quite a while. It was Kenneth Aiken, right? He moved on. When I first moved over to OCIO, Kenneth was working it, and then he hired Peter, and Kenneth went forget where he went. He went to one of the smaller federal agencies, but we. And we have a very savvy procurement team. So they baked in a lot of freebies. So that first kind of a couple enterprise agreements we had baked in a lot of free training. So with Microsoft, right? So there was a lot of forward thinking from of our strategic leadership at the time in the OCIO office. So Kevin Dealey and Joe and Melinda, and leaning into how can we, maximize our investment at the, in our enterprise agreement, and in this case with Microsoft, and get, bake in a lot of free training. And then with that then came our partnership with Amazon. So those being the two leaders at the time. And now we have Google at the table. So this model of free training. So in the early days, it was, we would have a class, 50 people would show up, all hands on. We take one of our training classes and we would have like the big guns coming in, you know, from Microsoft, you know, the folks that were, you know, from, you know, in Washington coming out and meeting. And so really weighted speakers and trainers and the folks building the tools and the technology and directly in the know, and working directly with the staff. And it was just open come, you know, we would hold them as often as they would fill up. So that was huge in building the community, giving them that real like high end tech training. It wasn't good. It was, you know, so that was really good. So you're getting it directly from the source. And then that's just rolled. I think what every month we would have 2 training classes and we would reach out to the community and see what they want to know. And we just kept building the knowledge, and we've been doing that for years. We still do it. And we have regular office hours as the other thing that was, I think, and we do this in other key areas. So we do this with all the key cloud vendors. So their office hours are virtual now, but basically you can show up and ask your specific component question. It can be a one-on-one with the Google Cloud SME or the Azure or the AWS. I mean, that direct access with our team there, you know, and sometimes Ron's there, our CTO. I mean, you got direct access to the brightest minds on this for you. And then we know your problem. You need help, we'll figure out how we can help you. So, and it's not a lot of time. We do that, what, Peter, like once a month, we do these office hours.
Yeah, almost every Thursday now. So
Yeah.
Before we would do these immersion day that would last all day, or sometimes 3 hours, sometimes 6 hours, as mentioned. So just train you in specific areas of a technology or specific area of vendor. But now we're hosting it on you know, every Thursday now for 1 hour for these office hours. And then we have breakout, the different breakout. But as Monique said, you know, at the beginning we built into the contract, you know, you can procure X amount of Azure, X amount of AWS. How much can you give us in training? And they were very glad to help because, you know, they want us to buy more Azure or more AWS and other vendors. So they were very willing to build that into the contract. So we rolled off that for the first few years. And now we moved on, you know, as the organization matured, we moved on to more office hours. So it's more quick hits, but making training consistent, I think, is and available. It's very key. You know, everyone has busy schedule, and if you are consistent, say, okay, training is going to be this specific, you know, hour, specific day, every month, every week, then folks can make time for it, so they don't schedule their own meeting around that time. And so it's all we did. We're always present, and we send lots of reminders out for our workshop, our office hours, and have, you know, we have a portal that has all the old office hours, slides and decks and scripts and so forth that you can download. So it's always a resource that you can always come in and choose. So I think that has helped. We also partnered up with Microsoft a couple of years ago when they had their, you know, some of the more advanced classes was offered for free. That was their first time trying to get 500,000 people certified. And we were able to push through a small number, about 100 people. And our metric would, if we can get 20 to 25 people certified, they'll give us credit for another round of training. So we were able to get 20 people certified, and we got another round. Now other vendors have jumped onto the same bandwagon and said, hey, we can do that. So we can offer the same. So classes that they normally charge government or any people around, you know, $2,000 or so, or $3,000, they would offer it free if you can get certain amount of people certified. So it's been really a good avenue for us. And now that it's opened up more widely, and GSA is doing the same, where partnering up with some of these vendors and offering some of these more advanced classes for free. If you have a .mil or .gov email address, and get into, you know, a training pipeline, and then get into a training cohort, so that certain amount of people will go through certain training together, so that they mature up the ladder, not just taking all the intro classes, but taking the intro class and immediate class and then advanced classes, so they can get themselves certified and, you know, build up their skill set, and then really pick up from what the contract staff that we've brought on board, that we hire, you know, just have the same nomenclature, the same lingo, and the same level of understanding, and then, you know, carry on that that effort for operation or monetization or development that you know, our contract staff have supplemented us when we are in the first initial phase.
So we've got a few questions here and only a handful of minutes, so we'll try and hit these. This seems to be our problem. We don't want to make this longer, but we really appreciate all the great questions. So
We'll have a lightning round. It'll be great.
yeah, exactly. So we've got a question here from Doug that basically, do you see cloud-based SaaS to be easier to deploy, learn, and manage within the environment? And I think that you guys have seen that from a number of different angles, but would like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly if it's it's tailored to a particular work stream. So what you're seeing is a lot of vendors offered a very tailored work stream out of the box, So think of it akin to like low code, right? So then, so something that's just, much, you don't need as a higher skill, to run it and maintain it. You point and click, you're paying a little bit of the premium for that, but it's pretty much got 80% of what you need or higher, depending upon which work stream. So case management, claims management, that's like, I think there's a lot of good competitive, secure FedRAMP cloud-based SaaS tools out there now.
Yeah, and some of that ties to you need to more focus on the workflow, to change the workflow a little bit to fit the low code pieces, right? So I think people need to understand that as well. Like it's not just the technology, it's the people and actually the workflow. So sometimes the user is the impact, not necessarily the technology.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Mark has a question here. How does the cloud processing cost impacts of poorly architected applications get addressed in AppRat, migration, prioritization, chargeback, and other cloud smart decisions?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're that mature yet. I don't think I don't think we've done enough there yet to have that analysis yet. That's great questioning. To be honest, sometimes if you have to be just strategic with where you decide to invest in moving these systems to the cloud. So if it's a main mission need, they're already spending a fair amount of dollars on it, so you can flex there, and they're less concerned maybe about the total bottom line as it is about the efficiencies you're going to move towards. So for instance, the department completed pretty long effort with consolidating its Just Grant system and rolled it out last fall. That was a huge effort that consolidated a number of efforts that was based on consolidating a number of low code solutions, and that's in the cloud, right, Peter? The Just Grants, right? Yeah. So that was less. I was making sure I had the right example. I've been talking on and on about the wrong thing, but anyways, it's I mean that was probably a lot more money to get to that point, and we have a few more phases afterwards. Then we had to keep rolling back the MVP, to get to meet. But it had these huge repercussions of savings on the finance tail and tying into the department's finance system and getting off that legacy system. So once you align those, like it was this huge, huge benefit long term. But if you just looked at the cost to get to that door, it probably wouldn't look attractive. So I don't know if that answered the question.
No, I think that was good. And I don't know, Mark, that we'll be able to get to your last question, as Nicole has jumped on to let us know that we are at the tail end of our session. I want to thank Peter and Monique, Bill, and thank you always, Nicole, for all your hard work in making these things happen. But again, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for attending. Our next one will be in 2 weeks, and thank you for all the questions and really enjoyed it. So I think Nicole's going to want to snap a picture here for social media prosperity. So whenever you're ready, Nicole.
All right, 1, 2, 3. All right, perfect.
Great.
Thank you, Monique and Peter, for joining us.